Hello, everybody. This is week 11, and we'll continue business and contract law. This week, we will talk about occupational health and safety, compensation, and employment insurance. And if we talk about detailed agenda, we will get introduction to occupational health and safety, occupational hazards, workplace safety regulations, compensation and benefits, employment insurance overview, safety training and education, injury reporting and incident investigation, emergency response protocols, risk assessment and management, legal compliance and responsibilities, continuous improvement in safety practices, and then continue. Let's understand introduction to occupational health and safety. So we are focusing on fundamental aspect of occupational health and safety and emphasizing its importance for employee well-being and legal compliance. By upholding health and safety standards, organizations can create a conducive work environment, enhance employee satisfaction, and mitigate legal risks. The importance of occupational health and safety. It is prioritizing occupational health and safety in the workplace. It is crucial for ensuring the well-being of employees and promoting a positive work environment. Employee well-being. Employee well-being encompasses physical, mental, and emotional health, all of which are influenced by the working condition of all which are influenced by the working condition and safety measures in the place. Investing in employee well-being can result in higher job satisfaction and lower turnover rates. Turnover rates means people who resign from the job, and it is called turnover rate. How many employees leave your company every year? Legal compliance. Adhering to occupational health and safety regulation is not only a legal requirement, but also a moral obligation for employers. Compliance ensures that workplaces are safe and free from hazards, protecting both employees and the organization from potential risks and liabilities. What is OHS Act? So, the main purpose of OHSA is to provide the legal framework to achieve our goal of protecting workers from health and safety hazards on the job by setting out duties for all workplace parties and rights for workers to help establish a strong internal responsibility system in the workplace. And it is to establishing measures and procedures for dealing with workplace hazards and providing for enforcement of the law where compliance has not been achieved voluntarily. What is internal responsibility system? It is the workplace parties' compliance with the respective statutory duties is essential to the establishment of a strong IRS at workplace. The IRS internal responsibility system supports a safe and healthy workplace. The IRS means that everyone in the workplace has a role to play to keep workplace safe and healthy. Under the IRS, employers, supervisors, and workers all have the key roles to play in taking responsibility for health and safety at workplace. What is workers' responsibility? Workers in the workplace who see a health and safety problem such as a hazard or controversial of OHSA in the workplace have a statutory duty to report the situation to the employer or a supervisor. Employer's responsibility. Employers and supervisors are required to address those situations and acquaint workers with any hazard in the workplace that they do. The employer, typically represented by a senior management, has the greatest responsibility with the respect to health and safety in the workplace. A strong IRS is an important element of a strong health and safety culture in a workplace. A strong health and safety culture shows respect for the people in the workplace. The respective roles and responsibilities for all workplace parties are detailed in OHSA. This is the basics for the internal responsibility system.
Welcome to the Ontario Federation of Labour Power of Many presentation on the 3 important rights that workers have under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It is important for workers to know their rights under the Act. This slideshow provides a brief overview of those rights. Who is covered by the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the OHSA? The Act applies to almost every worker, supervisor, employer, and workplace in Ontario. It covers owners, constructors, and suppliers of equipment and materials to workplaces that are covered under the Act. However, there are some exceptions. Some workers are not covered by the Act. They include owners or occupants or servants working in individual private residences or on the land surrounding them. Some places are covered by federal jurisdiction, so they're not covered. That said, some outside contractors and employees are covered under provincial jurisdiction, even if they're working in a federal workplace. Here are some examples of federal workplaces and how they're regulated. Federal workplaces include workplaces like post offices, airlines, airports, banks, certain grain elevators, telecommunications, and any sort of interprovincial transportation. Trucking, shipping, rail, and buses are all covered under the Canada Labour Code, which is administered federally through Employment and Social Development Canada. Now let's talk about the 3 rights that workers fought for and gained many years ago so that you have the understanding you need to protect your health and safety in your workplace. The 3 fundamental rights of workers under the Occupational Health and Safety Act are the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse. Workers have fought to obtain these rights. Let's run through them and how you exercise them in the workplace. The right to know includes the right to receive training so that you can do your job safely and understand the health effects of hazardous exposures, such as chemicals or toxic substances found in many workplaces. This could include exposure to coronavirus. The right to know also means that workers must receive information on many types of hazards, including machinery, equipment, or violence and harassment, which is unfortunately all too common in workplaces today. The right to know also means workers must be provided with information about what to do in the case of an emergency or injury. Injury and illness need to be reported to the employer so action can be taken immediately. The next right we're going to look at is the right to participate. All workers have the right to participate under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. This right means that workers have a say in helping to make and keep the workplace safe and healthy. In a workplace with 20 or more employees, the right to participate is primarily exercised through a joint health and safety committee. On that committee, half the members are workers who have been selected by other workers in that workplace. For workplaces that are smaller, between 6 and 19 workers, there must be a health and safety representative. Again, that representative must be selected by the workers to represent them. The next right is one of the most important rights that workers have, the right to refuse unsafe work. To exercise the right to refuse, a worker need only have reason to believe that there is a hazard. You do not need to have proof that the work, equipment, or machinery might hurt you or another worker, or that you are in danger of workplace violence. There are 4 steps to follow to refuse unsafe work. The first step is to tell the employer. Who you should tell depends on who is in charge in your particular workplace. For instance, you might tell a frontline supervisor, or if you work in a medical care facility, you might tell the charge nurse. It depends who the supervisor is in your particular workplace. Once you've told the supervisor, they have a duty to investigate your concern. That investigation is the second step in refusing unsafe work. Step 3 is that while they are investigating, it is your responsibility to remain in a safe place. Step 4 comes after the investigation. If it is found that you have refused unsafe work on reasonable grounds, then in most cases, the employer must call the Ministry of Labor. Now, let's review the steps. First, tell your employer about the hazard and that you are refusing work until it is investigated. Remember that you do not need to know the exact section of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, only that you have a concern and will not work until that concern is resolved. The employer then has a duty under the law to investigate. This is step 2. Depending on the size of the workplace, they must do so with a member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee or the Health and Safety Representative. Step 3 is that while the investigation into the hazard is happening, you need to remain in a safe place near your workstation until the investigation is complete. There is one exception in this step, and that is in the case of workplace violence. In those cases, you must go to a place where you are no longer at risk of violence. And step 4. If the investigation by the employer and the worker representatives finds no reasonable grounds and you still believe that the work is hazardous, your employer must call the Ministry of Labor so that an inspector can investigate and render a decision. There are some limitations on the right to refuse. These limitations include people working in hospitals, long-term care homes, paramedics, firefighters, police, corrections workers, and teachers. These are jobs where the circumstances of their work have risks as a normal condition of employment. For instance, a firefighter couldn't refuse to enter a burning house because it's part of their job to help put out the fire. For these workers, a work refusal would directly endanger the life and safety of another person. For instance, a nurse could not exercise the right to refuse if it would put a patient in jeopardy. Workers have important duties under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The first duty of workers is to follow the law and the health and safety policies and practices in their workplace. They also have a duty to wear and use protective equipment that is required in their workplace by the employer. As well, workers have the duty not to work or act in a way that would hurt themselves or another worker. And finally, it is also a worker's duty to report hazards or injuries to their supervisor. This isn't necessarily refusing to work with a hazard. However, it is important to provide the information to the employer so that it can be resolved. Employers also have duties under the Act. Employers have a duty to take all reasonable precautions to protect the health and safety of workers. They have the duty to ensure that equipment, materials, and protective equipment are maintained and in good condition so that workers are not put at risk by poor maintenance. Employers must provide information, instruction, and supervision to protect worker health and safety. Finally, it is the duty of the employer to cooperate with the Joint Health and Safety Committee, which will make recommendations to the employer. It is very important for workers to know that it is totally illegal for employers to use any kind of reprisal against you for acting on any of your rights. That means the employer is not allowed to threaten you, fire you, threaten to fire you, suspend you, or otherwise punish you when you exercise your rights. There must be no intimidation and no penalty. Reprisals are totally illegal. If an employer does enact reprisals against a worker, there are places where workers can get help. You can call the Ministry of Labor at 1-877-202-0008.
Okay, so let's understand physical, chemical, biological, and psychological risks. What is physical hazard? Physical hazards in the workplace include factors like noise, vibration, extreme temperature, and these can result in injuries or illness. Implementing safety Measures such as protective equipment and proper training can mitigate these risks. Same thing with chemical hazards and biological hazards. Biological hazards stem from exposure to organisms or pathogens in the workplace, leading to infectious or diseases. Proper hygiene practice, vaccination program, these controls can help us to control the spread of germs. Physiological risk. Physiological hazard include factors like workplace stress, harassment, violence, bullying that can impact the mental health and well-being of an employee. Regulatory framework. Workplace safety regulations are established by government bodies to ensure that employers adhere to specific standards and practices to protect employees from harm. Compliance with these regulations is essential to avoid penalties and maintain a safe work environment. Standard compliance. Safety standard outline these requirements for different aspects of workplace safety, including equipment, training, emergency procedure, hazard communication. Inspection procedure. Regular inspection conducted by authorized agencies or internal safety teams evaluate workplace conditions for compliance and safety regulations. Identifying hazards through inspections allow for timely corrective actions to enhance workplace safety.
Let's talk big picture first. Back in the day, there were no fall. Let's talk big picture for a minute. This video is about the laws and regulations that are supposed to keep employees safe work. My name is Brandon Robertson, and I'm an employment lawyer. Now I'm going to answer the following questions in this video series. What laws protect the safety of workers? What are your rights if your employer is breaking those laws? How should you report an unsafe work condition? Who do you report that to? How much money can you win if you get fired for reporting safety violations? What happens if you get hurt on the job? And how do you get compensated for the time off of work following an injury? I'm going to explain the answers to these questions without using a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo or jargon. So if this interests you, keep watching. This video is part one in a four-part series called Workplace Safety for Employees. In this first video, I will detail your rights to a safe working environment and the laws that are there to protect you. The next video is how to properly report an unsafe work environment. The third video is what to do if you get retaliated against for reporting an unsafe workplace. And the final video is what you should do if you get hurt on the job. Now, I strongly recommend that you don't skip ahead. Watch all four of these videos in order. The foundation that I explain in this video is key to understanding the second, third, and fourth video. And since safety-related cases can be very valuable, it is truly unfortunate when I can't help a worthy client because they didn't know the basic information regarding their rights. But before we get our hands dirty with the whiteboard, I need to say two quick things. Number one, a license to practice law in California. I'm making this video for workers all across America. This video covers the basics. This video should not be taken as legal advice for your situation. The workplace safety rules can differ from state to state, and more importantly, I don't know you or anything about your situation. You should never take what is said on a YouTube video as legal advice. If you need legal advice, you need to pick up the phone and call a lawyer in your state. Number two, if you are in California, please don't call me.
looking for answers to basic legal questions. The free consultation process at my office is primarily for Californians who get fired, may believe they have a case for wrongful termination, retaliation, discrimination, or something serious like that. Consultation process is not for giving out free legal advice. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into it. I forgot one last thing before we get started. My guess is that if you're watching this video, you've experienced a safety issue at work. Could you please take a second and tell us about your issue in the comment section down below? The more people that share their experiences, the more others will learn from those experiences and see issues in their own workplaces and put pressure on their employers to fix them. Together we rise, separate we fall. Let's talk big picture for a minute. Back in the day, there were no safety standards for American workplaces, which led to thousands of unnecessary injuries and deaths. Some ruthless employers drove their employees hard in the quest for profit. And if an employee got hurt or killed, the company didn't care. They would just replace them with another worker and carry on with business as usual. After plenty of debate, federal and state governments started regulating safety at work. They have passed thousands of laws and regulations that companies must comply with. And if they don't, companies are penalized, fines, lawsuits, criminal penalties, and civil damages. This video summarizes common employer obligations under these laws. So let's get to it. It's about time that we talk about OSHA. In 1970, the federal government passed the Occupational Safety Health Act, OSHA. OSHA set forth the basic safety regulations that apply to all employees nationwide. Some states, like California, where I practice law, implemented what's called Cal-OSHA, which is found in the Labor Code, Section 6300. Cal-OSHA adds additional safety regulations to the federal regulations. All of these laws are meant to promote healthy and safe working conditions for individuals in the country. With some exceptions, OSHA laws and regulations apply to all employees, whether you work for a small, private little company, a huge publicly traded company, or a local city government, or even the federal government. These laws apply to almost everyone. The first part of OSHA and Cal-OSHA, the first regulations that you should really know about, are called the general duties. These are the general legal requirements, the bare minimum that every workplace, regardless of industry, regardless of task, must comply with. Under OSHA, number one, every employer is legally required to provide its employees a workplace free of recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to its employees. And number two, the employer is legally obligated to comply with OSHA safety standards put out by the Secretary of Labor. And all that can be found in 29 U.S.C. 654 subsection. Cal-OSHA's general duties are similar but better. Number one, every employer is obligated to furnish safe and healthful employment to its employees. Number two, employers must do everything that is reasonably necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of employees. Number three, employers shall furnish and use safety devices, safeguards, and shall adopt and use practices, methods, and processes which are reasonably adequate to render such employment and place of employment safe. And finally, employers are not allowed to require an employee to go to an unsafe workplace or a place of unsafe work. And all that can be found in the California Labor Code, Section 6400 to 6404. If you're paying attention, you can see that California's general duties are broader and not only limited to recognized hazards that could lead to serious physical harm or death. Not only does California's law apply to more situations, but it creates an affirmative default obligation to do everything that is reasonably necessary to protect its employees. Okay, so that is the general obligations under the employers. So if you see a violation of one of these general duties at your workplace, does that mean that you should run out and get a lawyer and sue them? No, absolutely not. In fact, you're probably not allowed to sue them in civil court for basic safety violations. But there are definitely times you should take action. And I will give you a detailed roadmap on what to do in this video series So if you're finding this interesting, keep watching. Before we get to more specific regulations in the rest of this video about safety, I should take a moment and discuss what kinds of injuries these laws seek to prevent. Primarily, these regulations aim to reduce physical injuries and deaths, so physical safety. Except in limited circumstances, OSHA does not attempt to directly regulate psychological safety, like bullying or harassment. With that said, we will talk about psychological safety in this video series, so if that's your primary issue, keep watching. I've also made a bunch of videos about harassment and bullying, if that is interest to you. Also, in addition to safety, OSHA tries to regulate workplace violence. Employees who have experienced acts of violence at work or become aware of threats, intimidation, or other indicators showing that the potential for violence exists should put his or her employer on notice that violence might happen. When notified, companies are supposed to take action to prevent it from happening, and if they don't, there are consequences. The general duties that we outlined earlier are just the starting point. Beyond that, and especially in California, there are many more specific regulations that apply to most industries. For example, personal protective equipment, PPE. Employers have a duty to furnish their employees with any necessary and effective safety devices. This can include things like gloves, safety glasses, helmets, belts, outerwear for bad weather, respirators, protective footwear, face guards, etc. And in California, PPE must be provided at the employer's expense. Beyond that, employers must ensure that each employee is instructed with and uses the PPE in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Next, HAZCOM, Hazardous Substances Disclosure. HAZCOM standard generally requires employers to inform their employees, to warn them the hazardous chemicals to which the employees may be exposed to in the workplace. Next, disaster planning. Employers must have an alarm system to alert employees of emergencies. They must also have a disaster plan, especially those companies who handle hazardous or flammable or explosive materials. An emergency plan must be in writing, and it must include emergency escape plans, procedures to account for all employees, procedures for employees who have to remain to operate critical equipment or plant operations, and it has to include a whole lot more than that. Next, ergonomics or repetitive motion injuries like carpal tunnel. Every employer who's had 2 or more employees suffer an RMI in the last year must implement a program to minimize RMIs. Any exposures that cause RMIs must be corrected in a timely manner or minimized to the extent feasible. The employer must consider engineering controls such as workstation redesign, adjustable fixtures, chair replacements, or tool redesign, and administrative controls such as job rotation, work pacing, or work breaks. Next, smoking. No California employer shall knowingly or intentionally permit, no person shall engage in smoking tobacco products in an enclosed place at any place of employment. But this ban on workplace smoking does not apply to certain places like hotel or motel rooms, guest rooms, designated smoking areas, tobacco shops, truck cabs, warehouse facilities, etc. Next, heat illness. Employers have a duty to control the risk of heat illness in outdoor places of employment. Heat illness is a really serious medical condition. And people call me about this all the time. And it results in the body's inability to cope with a particular heat load. That includes things like heat stroke, cramps, exhaustion. This can include, the employer might be required to provide things like water, shade, and other cooling measures. Training is also a big deal when it comes to heat illness. Finally, record keeping, right? Many OSHA standards require that employers keep records of injuries that happen on the job. While employers don't need to record every little boo-boo or Band-Aid, they do need to record serious injuries like death, anything that results in the employee being away from work for several days, medical treatment, first aid, loss of consciousness, or any other kind of significant injury or illness. Now, going beyond what we just discussed, OSHA and Cal-OSHA regulate safety by passing specific standards for specific activities and for specific industries. For example, OSHA has specific regulations concerning things like ladders, stairways, sanitation, fire extinguishers, cranes, woodworking machinery, right? Just about every type of toxic substance like lead, arsenic, asbestos, benzene, etc. that you could think of. Textiles, laundry machinery, ventilation, and the list goes on and on. Now, obviously, to keep this video short, I cannot comprehensively analyze the literally thousands of regulations that govern thousands of hazards found in hundreds of different industries, right? The video would be 24 hours long. There are specific requirements for just about every kind of activity or situation that you could think of. But this is not as daunting as you might think. For example, let's say you work as a painter. It might be wise to take 20 to 30 minutes, get on OSHA's website, and familiarize yourself with the regulations on the use of things like ladders, aerosols, and paint displays. Or if you work in a cabinet shop, it would be wise to check out the regulations on woodworking machinery, PPE, ventilation. Or if you work on a production line in a factory, look up ergonomics, power tool safety, and repetitive motion injuries. We'll put a link in the description below to OSHA web pages that contain the regulations at issue. And I highly recommend that you check these pages out after we finish the video. Now, before we take a quick look at what your rights are if you work in an unsafe environment, I think it's really important to take just a moment and note OSHA's most cited standards. These are the top 10 most common OSHA regulations that employers violate. Right now, employers are getting fined left and right for things like construction fall protection violations, such as people not using safety equipment when on roofs or high buildings under construction. Number 2, respiratory protection violations. Number 3, ladder violations. Number 4, HAZCOM violations, such as not identifying and pointing out the hazards to your employees. Number 5, scaffolding violations. 6, failing to train employees in the construction industry in fall protection. Failure to train employees can be a violation in and of itself. Number 7, electrified equipment lockout, like circuit breakers and power boxes not being disengaged properly when employees are working on them. Number 8, eye and ear protection violations. Number 9, powered industrial truck violations. And number 10, machinery guard and safeguards. Right? Put a link to the top 10 most cited violations on OSHA's website so you can see as this changes over time. Hopefully companies will get better at stopping some of these violations. Before we finish out this video, I want to give a brief overview of what your rights are. We are going to dive deep into this in the next video, but I think it's appropriate to tell you the following now. If you are being asked to work in an unsafe environment, you have the following rights. Number 1, you have a right to refuse to do unsafe work. It is illegal for your employer to punish you for refusing to perform hazardous work. Both of the following things are true. Number 1, performing the work would violate an OSHA health or safety regulation. That should be obvious, right? This includes the general duties that we talked about earlier. Number 2, the violation would create a real and apparent hazard to you or your coworker. Number 2, you have the right to report the violation to OSHA. Number 3, you have the right to receive written copies of information about the hazards in your workplace. Now, beyond that, if you are in an unsafe environment, I strongly recommend that you remain calm. Do not overreact. Do not become an aggressor. Unless immediate action is warranted, I recommend that you do your research on the regulations first before you refuse to do any work. I also recommend that you watch the rest of the videos in this series before you complain to your employer or OSHA. If you're going to submit a complaint, you want to make sure first that you are right. And if you are wrong, you might inadvertently ruin the relationship with your employer and kick off a chain of events that you cannot control. So keep watching because
To understand compensation and benefit, the workplace insurance system provides benefit and services to workers who have been injured at work or who have illness related to work. Workplace insurance is also called workers' compensation. To qualify for workplace insurance benefit, must meet the requirement set out in the law that governs workplace insurance, and it is called Workplace Safety and Insurance Act 1997.
Workers' compensation. You may know it's required for most employers in most states, but wondering, does it work? Meaning, policy, but what happens after that? It's a good question. Let's answer that for you right now. We're going to my channel where I talk about insurance and risk explain how workers' compensation insurance actually works. As I mentioned, workers' comp is a state requirement in most states when you have employees. Most employers purchase a policy from an insurance company to satisfy that legal requirement. Beyond the policy, workers' comp looks to cover employees who are injured or become ill on the job and pay for their medical costs and lost wages if they require time away from work to heal and recuperate. The workers' compensation policy protects both the employer and each employee of the employer in different ways. The employee is secure in knowing that if they suffer an injury or an illness on the job, that they have statutory benefits to cover them for medical bills, hospitalization, and lost wages. But workers' comp goes beyond that to also cover vocational rehab, funeral and survivor benefits if an employee is killed on the job, and long-term compensation for permanent injuries. The employer knows that workers' compensation stands between them and financial ruin should an employee be injured. In addition, Section 2 of the workers' comp policy also protects the employer if they're sued by the employee or their family for extraneous circumstances. Now, before I continue, can I ask you to smash that like button and subscribe? That'll help my channel grow and get more views by business owners like you. Thanks. I'm often asked, does workers' comp cover all injuries? The answer is no. There are circumstances where workers' comp does not respond, and the most common example I've seen is when an employee is injured off the job, usually over the weekend playing sports or working around the house, and the employee doesn't have health insurance, so they try and fake an injury at work on Monday morning. In many cases, these frauds are caught by the insurance company or their employer, and it's not covered. And in situations like this, the employee may be accused of committing insurance fraud. Broadly, any injury or illness sustained outside of work and not performing a job-related duty is not covered. If an employee intentionally injures themselves, this is also not covered. If an employee is injured while committing a crime, this is not covered. A common situation I've seen is when an employee assaults another employee and is injured in the process of that assault, and then files a workers' comp claim. An employee under the influence of drugs or alcohol who is injured on the job is typically also not covered. Now, rules vary from state to state, but these are the most common reasons employee injuries were not covered by workers' compensation insurance. Who pays for workers' comp? The employer pays the premium for workers' compensation, and no part of that premium is deducted from employee paychecks like health insurance. It's entirely borne by the employer. Next question I often hear is, how does an employer buy workers' compensation insurance? I have a specific video on that subject that you can view here. But briefly, an employer in most states can buy insurance from several different sources, from an agent or broker like me, through their payroll service, or directly online from another provider. In many states, the premiums will differ from one insurance company to the next, so employers often shop around looking for the best deal. And I have a few thoughts here on that subject. First, if you have more than a few employees, you should consider purchasing workers' comp through a broker who has specific expertise in this line of business and can help you with safety, risk control, and claims management, as we do here at the Coil Group. Second, I'm not a big fan of engaging multiple brokers on the quest for the lowest costs. In many cases, a good broker, like myself, represents most of the best insurance companies writing workers' comp, so we can do the shopping for you and you avoid the hassle of engaging multiple sellers. In fact, I did a video on that which explains it pretty well. Third, if breaking up your workers' comp payments with each payroll is important to you, most brokers can get you a pay-as-you-go workers' comp policy, so you don't need to bundle it with your payroll provider. Using your payroll company typically incurs additional fees, and again, a non-expert is handling what can be an expensive form of insurance and not add a lot of value to that transaction. Here's the bottom line. Workers' compensation is the simplest form of business insurance there is, but that doesn't make it necessarily easy. If you're looking for a team of dedicated experts to work with on your business insurance, including workers' comp, so that you're getting it right and keeping it right, then I'd love an opportunity to speak with you and see if we're a good fit for you and your business. My contact info is in the description box below. And in fact, there's a link there where you can book a call directly on my calendar. Promise when we speak, no aggressive sales tactics or other nonsense, just a conversation. Finally, here are two other videos related to workers' comp that you may want to watch as well. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget, like and subscribe. compensation.
Now, let's check coverage, eligibility, and benefit. Coverage of employment insurance. It is employment insurance provide financial assistance to employee during periods of unemployment, illness, or parental leave. It offers temporary big income support to eligible individuals to help them meet their basic needs. Eligibility criteria to qualify for employment insurance. Benefits individual must meet certain eligibility criteria such as having worked minimum number of hours and activity seeking employment. Benefits of employment insurance. It provides a safety net for workers facing temporary job loss or other unforeseen circumstances. These benefits help individuals to meet their financial obligations. Importance of safety training. Safety training equips employees with knowledge and skills to identify hazards, prevent accidents, and respond to emergencies effectively. Training methods. Safety training can be delivered through various methods such as workshops, simulations, online modules. Compliance requirements. Employers are legally obligated to provide adequate safety training to employees to ensure a safe working environment and comply with regulatory standards. Preparation for emergencies. Effective emergency responses protocols required throughout the preparation, including emergency plan, evacuation procedures, and crisis communication strategies. What are the communication strategies? It's clear and timely communication that is crucial during emergencies to convey instructions, update, and safety information. Drills and training exercise. Regular emergency drills and trainings exercise help employees familiarize themselves with emergency procedures, test responses capabilities, and identify areas of improvement. Risk identification. Conducting thorough risk assessment help identify potential hazards, mitigate strategies. It involves implementing control measures, safety protocols, and preventive actions. Monitoring and evaluations, its efforts enable organizations to assess the effectiveness of control measures, detect emergency risks, and adjust safety protocols accordingly. Employer duties. Employers have a legal obligation to provide a safe and healthy work environment for their employees. Employee rights. Employees have the right to work in a safe environment free from hazards and risks that may affect their health and safety. Feedback mechanism. Establishing feedback channel allows employee to provide insights, suggestions, and observations on safety practices and protocols. Audit processes. Conducting regular safety audits and inspections helps identify compliance gaps, operational inefficiencies, and areas of enhancements. Benchmark best practices. Benchmarking safety practices against industry standards and best practices involve and enables organizations to identify opportunities for improvement and enhance safety performance.
Have you ever thought how safe is our parents at their workplace? According to International Labour Organization, in every 15 seconds, a worker dies from the work-related accident or illness. And more than 2.3 million people get killed at work annually. In specific data from the USA, 4,836 workers get killed due to workplace injury in 2015. Isn't it alarming? But the question is, how to bring down the incident rate to zero? I mean, zero. Nobody get hurt at work. Who will work for a company if the person knows earlier that he or she might get hurt at work? Will you? Will not. Are we driven by faith, or we really want to make impactful change to prevent workplace accidents? But the question is, how? Let me take you with me back in time in 2001. I was so excited to share with my parents after I got my first job. They were very happy. And soon after, my father asked me, what would be my role? Frankly speaking, I did not have much knowledge before I joined as a health safety and environmental promoter, entry-level position. Along the way, I learned my job is involved with providing advisory support role to prevent industrial accidents. Now, my every day is a new day to identify the non-conformances, participate risk assessment, intervene unsafe acts and conditions, and achieve one safe day at a time. Time flies. I learned how important the HSE is for a company to survive in the long run. Good HSE performance not only create the business opportunity, but also make a company sustainable. If we look at the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, the environmental dimension, and the social dimension, which includes HSE, carries about 50% of the weight for a company to being a sustainable company, which means HSE is a must for your company to survive in the long run. Will you, the future generation, be considering to work for a sustainable company in future profession, or being an entrepreneur as a global startup? Although the objective and management culture might vary due to different geographical regions, but HSE management is an unavoidable journey. One thing is very much common. Companies often do not bear much civil liability for the fatalities at work. But of course, a deceased can be covered under compensation. Will it be strange to hear that a person get killed at work, but at the end, nobody killed him? Now the question is, what really makes a company to manage occupational safety and health. Here are the key drivers. The host country HSE requirements that impose the liability, contractual HSE requirements, if you are dealing with the global companies, in-house rules and regulations, and high cost to buy insurance, certification requirements from the certification system, like your OSHA's 18001, ISO 14001, and also for reputation. HSE becomes so integral part of today's business, it stretches the furthermost part of your supply chain. You cannot simply skip the responsibility if you do your own production or you sub to different countries. Let me share a real life example. 24th April 2013, a commercial building known as Rana Plaza collapsed in Bangladesh, the country where I come from. 1,129 people got killed from this most recent industrial accident in the country. It is simply unbearable. Besides the many direct factors, it was the most expensive wake-up call for poor safety management in the ready-made garments industry. Besides responsibility of the employer, the question being asked by the advocacy group, NGOs, politicians, even like the consumers like you and me, the question challenge the responsibility of the global supply chain. Now, the country got accord for fire and building safety and the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety. Both accord and alliance are independent, legally binding agreements between the global brands, NGOs, governments, and the retailers. It's a framework, a commitment to work towards a safer workplace. This is how we are playing our shared responsibility as a consumer, vendor, supplier, or brands. So the point is, HSC is no longer a business for your company, but also with whom you do business. So, of course, good HSC performance will give you the competitive advantage against your competitors. Local and international companies knows the benefits, and industry measure the HSC performance as the total recordable injury rate or lost time injury frequency rate per million man hours work. Oil and gas industries, where I come from, HSC performance report from 2015 indicates 54 fatal cases happened in 2015, where it recorded 115 fatal cases in 2006. The industry really made a progress in a decade, but it did not happen by luck, but a joint effort together with the government, clients, contractors, suppliers, vendors. But now the question is, why do we still have so many accidents? And the report also identified 5 common underlying causes. So let's speak about those shortly. Before that, let me share how the companies, especially global oil and gas companies, manage occupational safety and health risk. Global companies normally take a holistic approach to identify the areas that special focus through various preventive actions. Starts with the risk assessment. Risk assessment is no longer a choice, but a legal compliance required by many countries. The concept is very simple. You create the risk, you have to manage it. Through the risk assessment process, we identify the risk and also identify how to prevent and make it safe, prevent fatalities or accidents. But still, we can see many accidents. Where are the gaps?
So key takeaway from these slides are reflecting on learning from occupational health and safety practices, including the importance of risk management, compliance, and employee engagement. Safety culture development and future trends. Safety culture development, like providing a robust safety culture that involves insisting safety values, promoting awareness, and encouraging practices. Future trends. Anticipating future trends is in health, occupational health and safety, such as advancements in technology, AI-driven safety solutions, and agile safety management systems. Embracing innovations and safety abreast of emerging trends are essential for continuous improvement in the safety practices. So that's all for today. Presentation is already uploaded. You can refer to this. See you next week.